Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm Rinaldo. I'm a product manager at Baymard Institute, and today we'll dive into how to make checkout flows smoother, faster, and more user-friendly. Baymard Institute is an independent research institute, and we conduct large-scale e-commerce usability testing. Since 2009, we've conducted over 150,000 hours of e-commerce testing on all aspects of the e-commerce experience. Our research is used by more than 3,000 brands, including 71% of all Fortune 500 e-commerce companies. Now, before we go into the research findings, I'll first very quickly introduce Baymard's research methodology so you understand how we come up with these insights that I'll be sharing with you today. So as previously mentioned, our insights are based on more than 150,000 hours of e-commerce testing, or more specifically, they're based on over 3,600 usability test sessions. So it's real users testing live e-commerce sites following the Think Aloud protocol. During our testing, we focus on uncovering the underlying user behavior, and from there, we figure out which general design patterns work and which ones don't. All of those many years and hours of testing are distilled into actionable guidelines based on what we see during our testing to constitute good e-commerce UX. There are more than 650 guidelines in our catalog, and each guideline covers the exact design pattern that causes issues, as well as the design pattern that solves for those issues. You can almost think of these guidelines as usability best practices. We also then take that subset of guidelines and manually rate them against leading e-commerce sites. This has led to one of the world's most comprehensive e-commerce benchmark databases, and this is very handy for understanding the current state of the e-commerce space as well as the competitive landscape. We bundle all of that into our Baymard Premium platform, and this is where the findings of today's presentation come from. As a thank you for attending this talk, you get 2 months of free Baymard Premium access, so you can be on the lookout for that. No strings attached. At the end of the talk, there'll be a way to redeem that offer if you're interested, of course. So now that we understand Baymard's research methodology in a nutshell, we can start getting into these research findings. So obviously, during our research, we uncover various reasons for abandonment. First of all, of course, many sites face this challenge. And we've tracked, for instance, the cart abandonment rate over many years. And we've calculated the average to be 70.19%. And this value is based on 49 different studies containing statistics on cart abandonment rate. Now, of course, your numbers may be higher or lower than this, but it's still important to look into your cart and checkout to see what you may or may not be doing to affect this number. So let's explore some barriers that may prevent users from converting. There are many different reasons, of course, as to why a user would abandon a checkout. First of all, we see that a large group of users are simply not ready to buy it. They're just browsing. And there's only so much we can do to control that, and that segment is removed. So if you look at the remaining reasons, this is the distribution we get. And if you look at these reasons, we can see that a lot of them, in terms of checkout optimization, can be affected through design changes applied to the checkout. In fact, if we gray out these three related to pricing, delivery times, and return policies, we can see that these remaining 7 can be fixed purely through design changes. So a too long or complicated checkout process and forced account creation is something we will actively talk about and cover today. Other reasons include not trusting the site with credit card information, not being able to see the total cost of the order upfront, experiencing some errors, not enough payment methods being available, and then finally, their credit cards being declined. These are all reasons that made users abandon a checkout in the past 3 months as of taking the survey. If we focus on issues which Baymard has documented during our testing to be solvable, an average e-commerce site can gain a 35% increase in conversion rate. Now these gains, they won't come easy, but we still see that even when we audit checkout flows of companies who performed multiple checkout optimization projects in the past, that major gains are possible. And our latest checkout benchmarking reveals that an average e-commerce site has 32 checkout usability issues. Don't let this number discourage you or overwhelm you. Actually, the majority of the suggestions we will cover today and we generally propose are related to things like page layout or certain smart form field features that really don't require advanced technical implementations or deep pockets in order to be resolved. As we begin going through some of these checkout findings, you'll begin to see how accessible some of them really are. Now, as we were able to see earlier, 22% of users abandon a checkout due to the intimidating nature and a too long checkout flow. So obviously the question that naturally proposes itself is, what is the ideal length of a checkout flow? So first, let's take a look at what the averages are. Last time when we measured this year, we found that an average e-commerce site had a checkout flow of 5.1 steps. And this is a checkout flow for a new user. And the lightest shade of blue here denotes when we measured this year. And this is roughly the same as in 2021 when the average was 5.1 steps long. And this has roughly remained the same ever since we first started tracking this back in 2012 at large retailers. Now, first thing that it's important to mention is when users think of a cart, they perceive the cart to belong to the checkout. And because users think of it that way, we at Baymard also count it that way. So here, we have counted including the cart all the way to order review step, also including the order review step. So from cart to order review, both included. And the first thing that is interesting to note, if you look all the way to the left-hand side of this distribution, we can notice that there continue to be almost no sites with very short checkout flows. So cart plus one-page checkout. In fact, it may be even tempting to conclude that one-page checkouts are more or less dead among the top grossing US and European e-commerce sites. The same holds true for the other end of the distribution. These ultra-long checkouts with 8 or 9 steps also remain completely gone. So the shift is mainly towards checkouts that are 5 to 6 steps in length. However, despite this general interest in how the number of checkout steps impacts the checkout conversion rate and the checkout usability, our research indicates that that question is misleading. During our testing and checkout benchmarking, we found that the number of checkout steps isn't the most important or impactful aspect of the user experience for the user. Rather, it is what the user has to do at each of those steps that matters. The number of checkout steps has no direct and consistent correlation with the checkout user experience or the conversion rate. What's far more important is what the users have to do at each of those steps, or, in other words, how many form fields are there. Form fields actually represent the number of tasks that users have to complete. And what we do see to have a very consistent and direct correlation with both the checkout usability and the checkout abandonment rate is the number of form fields. For example, if you look here on the x-axis, we have the number of form fields, and on the y-axis, we have the mobile checkout UX performance. Blue dots represent some of the top retail companies in the world and their checkout performance, and the red line is the correlation between the number of form fields and the checkout UX performance. And as you can see, an increase in number of form fields decreases the overall checkout user experience. In other words, an increase in number of form fields increases both the actual and perceived complexity for the end user. So, when we're performing checkout optimization, the question we should be asking ourselves isn't how many steps do we have in our checkout, rather it's how many form fields we have. Can you actually answer that question for yourself? Do you know the exact number of form fields in your checkouts? I obviously won't ask you to share so you can be honest with yourselves, but knowing and controlling that number can have a significant impact on your checkout usability. Now, if we take a look at what the averages are, the last time when we benchmarked e-commerce flows, we found that an average e-commerce site has 11.2 form fields on average. That's quite a lot, especially when you consider that that number could be just 7. The lowest we can theoretically go is anywhere between 6 to 8. And this will, of course, largely depend on the country where the user is from. And it's important to know that here we are talking about physically shipped products. So let's take a look at a couple of examples of what a typical checkout flow might look like. So this example here with 15 form fields comes above average. And your checkouts might vary somewhat and differ from this one. But this is a rather representative example of the type of typing tasks that users encounter in checkout flows. Now we see all kinds of different checkouts. For example, there are checkouts with vastly number of checkout fields that reach even 45. This is a bit of an older example, but still holds the record for the highest number of form fields. On the other hand, we see entirely different checkout experiences. For example, this checkout flow is containing 8 form fields. And this is an entire checkout flow for a new user. 8 form fields. So this would be something to strive for, but even this implementation can be improved and the number of form fields can be reduced. Now, I obviously won't leave you with that. We will now cover exactly how to go from 17 to 7. Why 17? We typically see some combination of these form fields in that 14 to 17 form field range. Again, your fields might vary somewhat, but this is rather typical. We will now cover how users behave when they reach some of these input types, and we'll cover what is the underlying user behavior, and we'll optimize this checkout flow with the main objective being reducing the number of form fields that users have to consider. So let's take it from the top and start with the name field. This is the type of issue that users face when they reach the name field. Now this is from our eye tracking testing. So users reach the first field, they type in their name, Jessica Newman, they move on to the next form field to realize, well, a second, the first field was only for my first name, so they take their last name, put it back into the next form field to realize, wait a second, that's actually my middle name, and they have to take that input and finally paste it into the last name form field. So that's quite a bit of friction for something that is, or at least should be, quite simple. And yes, this also happens on sites that don't ask for a middle name. So even on sites that feature only first name and last name, this type of behavior would still happen. Now, why does this happen? We see during our testing that users think of their name and perceive their name to be a single entity. Their name is Jessica Newman, not first name Jessica, last name Newman. And because they think of their names that way, that's how they type it in. And this is not something you will see in your analytics for validation errors, because this is the type of mistake that users realize and fix as they progress through the page. However, given this friction for such a simple task, that friction can be quite significant. 42% of users during our user testing typed their full name into the first name form field at least once. 42%. Solution: during our testing, we've seen that simply using a full name form field is a much more flexible way, and it alleviates all of these associated frictions. First of all, it much better aligns with user perception of their own name. Secondly, if you have an average checkout flow of 11.2 form fields, even just merging first name and last name can result in roughly a 9% reduction of total number of visible form fields. Of course, if you feature middle names, titles, that reduction will even be higher. And then finally, it's a much more flexible way to support middle names, titles, prefixes, suffixes. If users want to include them, all they have to do is type it into the full name form field. Now, this improvement, alone and isolated, won't make or break your checkout flows, but it's part of the collective number of improvements you can make to your checkouts. Next, let's talk about address line 2, company, and coupon fields. We refer to these fields at Baymard as optional minority fields. What that means is some users will need them, so it would be detrimental to remove them entirely, but that doesn't mean that every single user needs to see them on the page. We see a surprising number of issues when users reach the address line 1 input. 30% of them come to a full stop and wonder, what are the differences between address line 1 and address line 2? They put in their address, move parts of it back and forth before they finally decide on how to proceed forward. And yes, this also happens on sites that clarify the difference. So even on sites that relabel the form field to apartment, suite, other, or even if they have placeholder text, it does help a bit, but it doesn't reduce the total number of users who get stuck. The reason why this happens, as we confirmed it during our eye tracking studies, open text form fields demand a disproportionate amount of attention from users. And we have to do everything in our power to try to alleviate that issue. Here, luckily, there is a design pattern that we found to work rather well. Simply collapsing this input behind a text link removed all associated friction. It's there for those who need it, but it's no longer an open text form field demanding attention. And we have confirmed this during our eye tracking studies. Users are not overlooking these elements. They're noticing their presence. However, because they're no longer open text form fields, it doesn't represent a task they have to complete. The same solution applies to the company name as well. Simply collapsing it allows those who need it to find it. Others can safely skip past it. The same solution also applies to the coupon or promotional code form field. However, this input field is much more disruptive than both the address line 2 and the company name. Because what happens when users reach a promo code as an open form field, they feel cheated. They know that others might be getting the product cheaper than they are, and they want to go hunting for coupons, and in order to do that, they have to leave the site or the app, and the risk is that they never come back. So the same solution applies. Simply collapsing it allows those who need it to find it, but others can safely skip past it. So collapsing address line 2, company, and coupon code for an average e-commerce checkout flow can result in roughly a 26% reduction in the total number of visible form fields. So that's quite a significant improvement. Next, let's talk a bit about address fields. Now, what we see during our testing when users reach address fields is that they often misspell or mistype their city or address. And they also struggle with these long drop-downs to select their state, county, region, province, of course, depends on the country. And 9% of manually entered addresses contain some type of mistakes and misspellings. And all of this is needlessly complex because we can actually provide a fully automatic address lookup feature to suggest and autofill subsequent address fields. This not only improves accuracy, but it actually saves time. Users type in a few characters and they get their full validated address instantly. This will, of course, result in vastly fewer typos, and it will definitely also result in faster form completion. However, when it comes to implementing this feature, there are a couple of things to look out for. First of all, even with a single field to complete, users are still prone to mistakes, typos, and misspellings. So the automatic address lookup feature should understand mistakes and still support relevant results. After that, we still want to serve all of the form fields that are related to the address. And there's two reasons for that. First of all, we have to give the user a fallback option of manually typing in their address if the actual feature is not working. And then secondly, it's helpful for allowing them to review their address before they proceed forward. And the last detail, when these suggestions during our testing were ranked alphabetically, it was most likely to result in users having to type more, and that, of course, diminishes the whole value of using this feature. So the best performing solution was to use users' IP geo-targeted address and then rank these suggestions according to the proximity to the user. Finally, if you for some reason cannot use or implement a fully automatic address lookup feature, another design pattern that we found to work rather well was a postal or zip code auto detection. All users have to do, as soon as they type in the last digit of their postal code, the site would autofill the city and the corresponding state region, county, or province, depending on the country. Now, no matter which implementation you use, whether that's a fully automatic address lookup feature or postal code or zip code auto detection, in this case, in the case of address form fields, we are not removing and reducing the number of visible form fields. However, what we're doing is auto-detecting and auto-filling that information, reducing the total number of form fields that users have to consider. So that way, we're streamlining address completion. Now let's talk briefly about billing versus shipping, because most sites ask for these two addresses. We've tested this quite extensively, and we've seen that for B2C sites, showing the billing address form fields by default is needlessly redundant and intimidating, because for most B2C companies, those two addresses will be the same. So the solution is quite simple, simply having a checkbox that defaults the billing address to equal the shipping address would work best. This will hide the billing fields, and hiding is the key here. We found during our testing that hiding them works better than pre-filling or disabling them. You would only do something like this if you would look into your order logs and come to a conclusion that indeed majority of your orders have the same shipping and billing address. Otherwise, it's not worth doing. Let's also touch on account creation, because for some checkout flows, this is actually a required part of the checkout. Our main finding here is that users have a very high level of perceived friction associated with the act of creating an account, especially when that act takes place at the beginning of the checkout flow. They perceive everything that comes after to be caused by account creation, including contact information, shipping information, payment information, and then of course this causes them to potentially abandon the flow simply due to the intimidating nature of the checkout flow. And we say perceived friction because, as you might know, creating an account will usually differ with only 1 to 2 extra form fields, which are usually password and repeat password. So all the other information that users are filling out, they would fill out regardless of whether they're creating an account or not. So that's why we say perceived friction, because the reality doesn't matter when user perception is this strong. 26% of users abandon a checkout when it starts with a forced account creation. There is a design pattern that we observed during our testing to work rather well. We refer to it as delayed account creation. What this means is that we're saving the option to create an account for the order confirmation step. So it will look something like this. Users enter checkout flow, they select a guest checkout option, which is prominently displayed. They progress through the checkout, and then on the order confirmation page, they are presented with a password field. So now, in the mind of the user, account creation feels just like the additional 1 to 2 extra form fields it actually is. So we started with 17 form fields, and we are now down to 7. So that's almost a 60% reduction in the total number of form fields that users have to consider. We've merged first name and last name. We have collapsed address line 2, company, and promotional code behind a text link, and we're using fully automatic address lookup features to streamline address completion. And finally, we have made account creation optional, and we have moved it to the order confirmation page. Again, when it comes to checkout optimization, what matters most is how many form fields users are required to consider. You can do anything in your power to reduce the number of total visible form fields. You can remove unnecessary form fields. You can use some of these smart form field features to collapse or hide optional fields. And we just went through how using some of these checkout findings, you can minimize the total number of form fields. An entire checkout flow for a new user in its default state can be as short as 6 to 8 form fields, 1 to 2 sets of radio buttons, and a couple of checkboxes in this example. It really can be as simple as that. Now, of course, this has been just a subset of our findings. Like I said earlier, it won't necessarily be that easy. It'll probably take a lot more. But as we mentioned earlier, an average e-commerce site stands to gain a 35% increase in conversion rate. So this is definitely something worth looking into. But even in our own research catalog, we have more than 100 checkout usability guidelines. And of course, they're not all equally important. Some do cause direct checkout abandonments, but others only amount to some friction in the form of users stopping, doubting, getting anxious, performing futile actions, etc. However, given the potential benefit, it's definitely worth to look into it. Now, if you want more insights, such as the ones I covered today, we have our blog, which has multiple hundred free articles that cover some of the research findings, just like the ones I shared with you today. But most importantly, as I promised earlier, to get 2 months of free Baymard Premium access, all you have to do is scan this QR code, leave your email, and I will set you and your team up with access. In case your scanners don't work, if you don't have data, if something's not triggering properly, you also have my email here, which is rinaldo@baymard.com. Just reach out, and we'll set you and your team up with access. I hope you found the insights I shared today to be helpful or valuable. If you have any questions, we'll now go into the Q&A section, and I'll be happy to help. But other than that, thank you so much.
Thank you, Rinaldo, for a very insightful talk. Do we have questions?
Hello.
Hello.
Yeah, I wanted to thank you for this great talk. And I have a question not about the checkout, more about login and registration. I have already the Baymard Premium. I'm a halfway to UX Master. And still, I have a question for e-commerce website. What do you think personally, which flow is better when login is in a sidebar, like drawer, you know, or the separate page?
In which step of the user journey?
For registration and creating account and login. We set password, everything like that.
Yeah, we don't actually have exact research on where to position it. What we do have research on is exactly what we covered earlier, and that is that guest checkout matters the most. Users often seek it, and they often overlook it when it's not the first thing positioned. So when it comes to registration pages, login pages, all that matters to begin with is to position guest checkout prominently. On mobile, that would mean positioning it at the top. On desktop, that would mean positioning it in the upper left-hand corner. So long as guest checkout is available and not easy to overlook, that's what would matter most in terms of our research when it comes to those steps in the user flow. Now, in terms of the exact design pattern, whether it should be a flyout, a sidebar, unfortunately, we don't have insights to that extent. But like I said, as long as the guest checkout is there, then that should be sufficient. And then you can potentially play with the positioning of the actual registration, like we covered today, having it delayed on the order confirmation page, or simply positioning the login flow below the guest checkout. But the common pitfall is to usually position login at the top and then guest checkout at the bottom. And of course, on mobile viewports, given the size of the screen, usually that guest checkout option falls out of it, and then users overlook it. So that's a big usability issue. But in terms of the other position, it's fine as long as it's below guest checkout option.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, do we have another question, please? I'll wait a few minutes.
Hello.
Hello.
Do you have any examples of like benchmarks of e-commerce platforms that do it the best, so we can take a look?
Yeah, of course. On our page, they're all ranked according to performance, so it's very easy to visually see which dots are the best, and all you have to do is, once you get access, to click on those dots, and it will lead you to a full analysis of the pages that do it best. You can break it down by an overall e-commerce experience, you can break it down by platform, or you can break it down by area of the site, homepage, search, checkout, product page, etc. So yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
Of course.
Do we have brave person? Oh yeah, brave person with the beard.
Hello. I have a question which may be not exactly for the checkout situation, more for the forums in general.
Yes, please.
Is there any like a universal answer to the question which are better to be marked, the required fields or optional fields?
We have research exactly on that, and we've tested this quite extensively against many industries across all the platforms, and the finding is always the same, and that is to always mark both the optional and the optional form fields. So we recommend marking both required and optional form fields.
Thank you.
Yes, of course. Having a label at the top such as all fields are required doesn't work. Every field needs to be marked with an appropriate label. Of course.
We still have some time for questions. Oh yeah, a brave woman this time.
Hello.
Hello.
Can you say a bit more about the difference in form in different countries?
Sure. That's an interesting question, and we often get it a lot, because sometimes we feature American, US-centric examples, and then people wonder, do these insights apply in Europe? And the answer is yes. We've done research tracks to verify that all of these insights apply both to the US market and also to the European market. Now, our finding is actually that many ways in which users react to user patterns are globalized. So we don't see any differences between certain countries, continents, etc., because users' previous experiences are informed by interacting with other globalized brands and products such as Google's, Facebook's, TikTok's, etc. So their expectations coming into our research tracks are usually similar. So at a high level, there are no differences between a user in Seattle, Washington in the States or Berlin, Germany. Where there are differences are in certain nuances. So obviously, addresses are formatted in different countries. Popular payment methods are different in various countries. Also, phone numbers are different. So there are certain differences, but everything that we cover today applies equally to Poland, Germany, England, Ireland, America, Canada, everywhere where we test and verify these findings. So you don't have to worry that some of these insights won't potentially apply. Of course.
Okay, another super brave person. Don't be shy, please.
There's a hand there.
Where?
In the back.
Oh. I'm coming. There you go.
Hi.
Hello.
Thanks for the talk.
Of course.
For designers who have spent a lot of time designing B2B applications, this entire ocean of e-commerce and conversion rates might be quite new. What do you suggest for them to kickstart their journey in this specific part of the domain? Of course, Baymard's free UX research would be a good starting material, but anything else do you recommend?
Well, equally as we do conduct research for B2C brands, we also conduct research for B2B brands. So it would be very difficult for me to summarize all the B2B findings, but for example, once you get access, if you reach out to our platform, there's a whole research track full of findings for B2B companies, so that would definitely be a good starting point. Obviously, B2B industry comes with a certain amount of caveats, so some of these findings that we covered today would apply, but others wouldn't. For example, collapsing the company name form field is not something that would apply on a B2B industry and other similar nuances. So I think when it comes to user testing insights into e-commerce, there's no one better, if I can humbly say, who does it better than us at Baymard. So once you get access to our platform, you can find many, many guidelines for different areas of the site there that specifically apply to B2B. There's also a whole section of the benchmark database that only features B2B sites. So that will give you plenty of inspiration, and it'll keep you occupied for a while, I'm sure.
Thank you so much.
Of course. There's a hand.
The mic is yours.
First of all, thank you for very inspirational presentation. And Question is about paying methods. What is the best practice to show a couple of options or just the whole list of possible paying methods?
So for most countries, the credit card will be the most popular payment option. And because of that, it is recommended to default that option. Now, in terms of the concrete design pattern, we found that radio buttons work the best. So if you have options that are designed that way and then have the credit card selected by default, that will remove also one interaction point because users don't have to click credit card and then type in their credit card information. Now, we haven't talked today at all about payment methods and credit card options. I would say, just given the larger topic we covered today, with the goal of reducing the total number of form fields, a common pitfall for credit card form fields is featuring a card holder name. That's one very quick and easy opportunity to reduce the total number of form fields, unless, of course, it's necessary for validation. But in most instances, it can be done without it. So in terms of offering them radio buttons and then selecting the credit card option by default. Now, in terms of which options to offer, of course, that differs from country to country. If I can recall correctly, for Poland, it was credit card, cash on delivery, and the third option escapes me, but I'm sure there was a third one. Unfortunately, I can't quite recall it. I'm sorry. Maybe it comes to me soon, but anyways, the credit card usually is the one that we want to default. Of course, you know your user preferences and what users in Poland would expect. Other countries feature certain third-party payment methods that you wouldn't see in other countries. So those are, again, if you have a global brand, those little details and instances are worth paying attention to. But to your original question, how to structure it, radio buttons work the best. Yeah.
Okay, Rinaldo optimized his talk very efficiently. So we have 5 minutes for questions still.
Hi, thank you for your talk. So I have a question regarding the research and the patterns that you said are really similar in no matter what kind of market it is, US or Europe, and how about Asia? Have you also based that conclusion on research in Asia?
We do not conduct research tracks in Asia, only in North America and Europe. However, we have worked with brands that have globalized branches across North, South America, Europe, and Asia, and we've seen that some of these findings, if not a good chunk of them, apply. So we've worked with Asian-based companies and clients, and we've seen that these insights work and apply, but unfortunately, we can't say that we've conducted testing in Asia because we haven't. So you can take that how you will. So research findings potentially will apply to some of them, but unfortunately we don't, at this point, conduct direct user testing with users based in Asia.
Hi.
Hello.
My name is Anna. I'm already a Baymard user, so
Oh, nice.
thank you for your hard work. And I wonder regarding filling out forms and your research with users, do you conduct them using participants' devices or other devices?
Sorry, if you conduct them using?
Using their own devices, the participants?
Oh. Yes, yes. The answer is yes. Users use their laptops, mobile phones. Yeah, absolutely.
All right, because I'm wondering how the auto-filling, how does it impact on the research?
Yeah, autofill, and we have research on that. We also have usability guidelines on that. The answer is, it's fine. We encourage sites to optimize form fields for the autofill to work. There are certain things to pay attention to. For example, today we covered the feature called fully automatic address lookup feature. Now, obviously, if that's triggering on an address form field, then autofill shouldn't be triggering to override it and things like that. So, but absolutely, we recommend optimizing the form fields for autofill, and then if users use it, then that streamlines the whole typing flow for them, absolutely. The whole reason why we didn't cover it today is because we can make sure that's in place, but it's entirely up to the user whether they will have that enabled on their browser. So today we focused more during the talk on what we can do for the user, but autofill, absolutely. It works best as long as it's optimized both on desktop and mobile. It is recommended to implement it.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
I think this will be the last questions for today.
There's 2 hands.
I'll think about it.
Hi,
Hello.
Anna, and I'm wondering, because you showed us a cool graph of number of form fields and the UX, and I was wondering, how do you quantify UX? What does this particular line mean?
So we at Baymard have a whole methodology on quantifying UX. So when I say UX performance scores, that's what I'm referring to. So I covered at the beginning the research methodology. So we uncover the issue that the user struggles with during our testing. And then we quantify, because we conduct large-scale testing, we quantify both the frequency and the severity of that issue. So some issues, of course, happen more often, and then some cause direct checkout abandonment or direct site abandonment, others cause disruption, and others are just minor issues. So we quantified by, first of all, having multiple levels for the severity, having multiple levels for frequency, and then merging those 2 together. That will give us a score. And we assign that score to a particular guideline. And because we have more than 600 guidelines, when we're benchmarking e-commerce sites, we just see how their implementation stacks up against what we observe during our testing based on that frequency and severity. And that will then give us scores which are then able to quantify. And then we can quantify that on a certain area of an e-commerce site or just a part of the flow or anything like that. But that's how we come up with those scores, and that's how we can compare e-commerce sites against each other.
Thanks.
Of course.
Okay, and the last question on Hex stage for today goes to you.
Thanks. I have a question about reviews, and I remember there's the guideline where it says that never have an account wall to submit a review. And okay, we implemented that. We removed the account wall on big e-commerce platform in US. And basically, the next day, we received a lot of fake reviews from competitors. They were awful. And yeah, that caused some confusion from marketing team. Yeah, and they had some questions. And still, we do not have enough time to implement like a verified buyer page. And I'm still trying to convince them that we should leave it open. We can give replies or something like that. But my question was, maybe you know some life hacks? What can we do to figure that out?
Well, you kind of answered and said what I was going to say. Using that verified purchase is the way to combat that. But if you have such a high issue, potentially maybe it's worth turning it off for a certain time period if it's that big of an issue. Of course, it depends how, obviously, desperate, not to use any other words, you are for those reviews. So obviously, once you do that, yes, those reviews will come flooding in, but then it takes some manual curation to go through them and see which ones are valid and aren't. But that's why we recommend and why we talk about a verified purchase in our guidelines, exactly for that reason. So unfortunately, outside of that, I'm not really sure. Potentially, on order confirmation emails, having that link to leave a review and not gating it by default, just redirecting it to the site would be one way to approach it. But other than that, I'm sorry, but I'm out of ideas.
And what about reviews approval manually by a manager? Because that's the solution marketing team wants without that effort, you know? And what do you think?
Well, nothing's without effort. Of course, it takes, manual curation is very exhaustive. It takes time, but if that's what's needed, if that solves the problem, then maybe it's a temporary solution. It's definitely not a long-term solution because verified purchase option is a long-term solution, but I guess I don't see a way how they can do it without investing some type of effort into it. I'm sorry.
Yeah, great, thank you. That's what I wanted to hear.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thanks.
You're welcome.